Hello, listen. If you're new here, consider subscribing and let me know where you're listening from. I still check comments when I can. It helps remind me there are real people out there somewhere. My name's Ethan Ward. Before everything changed, before the signals went dead, before the roads filled with abandoned cars and frozen bodies, I lived a pretty quiet life. I worked fire surveillance for the U.S. Forest Service. Just me, a radio, too much coffee, and miles of silent evergreens stretching below my lookout tower. That tower sat on an old steel frame, drilled into bedrock, creaky stairs, cold windows, and a catwalk that groaned every time. The mountain wind came screaming through the pines. Most people hated that kind of isolation. For me, it was peaceful, predictable. But peace doesn't last forever. So if you're hearing this, maybe you're somewhere warm, or maybe you're wrapped in a blanket, trying to forget how dark the world has become. Just listen carefully. Because this is how I took that old fire lookout, reinforced it piece by piece, and survived the first winter of the outbreak. Life up there was never fancy or impressive to anyone who did not understand silence. It was cold mornings where coffee tasted burnt, but somehow comforting. It was long hours staring at tree lines, waiting for smoke or movement. It was the sound of wind scraping across metal and wood. Some days it felt like the sky stretched forever, and I was the only person left in the world. And for a while I liked that feeling. Every morning had a rhythm, not a schedule someone gave me. A rhythm I built to keep my mind quiet. First thing after waking up was checking visibility. Sometimes clouds sat low, like a thick white blanket, and the entire valley disappeared. Other days everything was so clear it felt unreal. I could see for miles across pine forests, glaciers, distant towns, and frozen rivers, catching the morning light. After that it was wind readings. The tower always swayed a little when gusts rolled through. The structure was old, and every bolt, every railing spoke with its own tired sound. I learned to tell normal wind from a dangerous one by the way the tower groaned. Then came solar checks, battery output, water filter inspection, and confirming the thermal cameras had not frozen during the night. The cold could lock gears, sensors, or hinges without warning. Up there, even small mistakes could become life-threatening. Sometimes while working I heard elk somewhere far below. Their calls echoed up the mountain like slow, sorrowful horns. Sometimes coyotes yipped in the dark early hours, chasing something or warning each other. And sometimes there was nothing, not even wind. Just silence so heavy I could hear my own heartbeat. That kind of silence changes a person. Some people go crazy thinking too much. Others find peace because nothing interrupts them. I was somewhere in between. I liked the quiet, but there were moments it felt like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something. The tower itself was a relic from the 1970s. Narrow staircase, rusted bolts, wood floors, patched so many times I could see layers of history beneath the top floors. The radio worked when it wanted to. Some days it crackled non-stop, with static or distant traffic from hikers and rangers. Other days it was dead quiet through every channel, like the whole world had stepped away. The windows never sealed quite right. During storms, cold air forced its way through every tiny gap. I used towels, pieces of cloth, and eventually foam insulation to slow the drafts, but it never fully stopped. At night I slept with 2 blankets and still woke up with cold fingers. The catwalk around the tower was meant to help inspect the roof and exterior equipment, but the steel railing shook violently whenever strong mountain wind hit. The first time it rattled, I thought something was climbing the stairs. My heart nearly exploded out of my chest. After a few weeks I learned that sound too. Still, every now and then it unsettled me, especially during late hours. There were already warning signs that something was off long before the world collapsed. Small things at first. The west side door lock would jam during extreme cold, and it took both hands and full body weight to force it shut again. Sometimes I felt watched when I stepped outside onto the catwalk at night. Maybe it was imagination. Maybe not. Under my desk was an old laminated manual left by someone years before me. Most pages were routine safety rules, fire procedure, first aid, and maintenance logs. But near the end, there was a single line, written differently from everything else. The letters looked shaky, uneven, like someone wrote them while scared or freezing. Do not leave the tower after dark. Not for any reason. There was no signature, no explanation, no protocol attached to it. Just that one chilling line. At the time, I laughed it off. I assumed a previous ranger had been alone too long, and the isolation broke something in their mind. Up there, people used humor or superstition to cope. I figured it was just another ghost story told by someone who did not want the next guy getting bored. But looking back now, that line was not a joke.
Stay home. Avoid contact.
It was not paranoia.
Unknown infection
It was
reported.
not a warning meant to scare a rookie. It was truth. A truth I would only understand once the world began to change. Back then, though, life felt simple. The sun rose, the sun fell, and the forest below moved at a pace older than civilization. Snowstorms came and went. Wildlife migrated. The days blended into each other. Quiet, predictable, steady. If I had known how fast that routine would fall apart, I might have paid closer attention. Maybe I would have reinforced the door earlier. Maybe I would have stored extra fuel, water, food, and batteries. Maybe I would have listened to the fear that lived under the silence. But I did not. Because at that time, the world still felt normal. And normal makes people blind to danger. The first sign that something was wrong did not come from the forest or the sky. It came from the little rectangle of glass in my hand. My phone buzzed once against the metal desk and lit up with an emergency banner in bright orange. It looked like any other Amber Alert, except it was not about a missing kid on the highway. The message was short and strange. Stay home. Avoid contact. Unknown infection observed. Up in the tower that felt ridiculous. There was no traffic jam, no neighbor, no crowded store for miles in any direction. Only tree lines, wind, and snow. I stared at the words for a few seconds, then turned the phone face down on the desk. I assumed it was some kind of overreaction or test. Agencies loved tests. People in offices loved checklists and simulations. In my head, I filed it next to wildfire drills, evacuation templates, and those yearly emails that told people how to prepare for earthquakes then were forgotten 2,000 minutes later. Maybe some lab had a leak. Maybe a hospital misreported something, and the system overcorrected. Somewhere down there, a guy in a reflective vest was probably apologizing on television, telling everyone not to panic. Besides, alerts like that were for the valleys and the cities. I lived above all of it. The nearest town that mattered was Yakima, and even that felt like another planet from where I sat. I made another round across the room, checked the stove, checked the battery readings, noted the wind direction out of habit. Outside the tower, the forest lay still under a pale winter sky. If there was an infection down there, it could not reach me through 40 feet of air and a steel ladder. An hour later, the radio disagreed. At first, it was just extra noise on the usual channels. More traffic than a normal weekday. Rangers checking in with supervisors. Someone from dispatch trying to raise a number that did not answer. Words like containment and incident level and civilian behavior popped up in short bursts between static. Then a voice from district traffic control
Do
broke
not
through,
leave the
sounding
tower
much less
after
calm.
dark.
than the usual bored drawl. We have a situation at Ridgeway Market in Yakima. Multiple injuries. People are attacking each other on the floor. Biting. Staff cannot regain control. The way he said biting made the hairs on my arms stand up. You can hear when a person is trying to keep their voice steady and failing. I turned up the volume and sat down on the edge of the bunk, the mattress springs cold under my hands. More reports followed. A convenience store near the highway. A parking lot altercation that did not stop even after security arrived. A paramedic describing a patient who would not stay down even with sedatives. Some transmissions cut out mid-sentence, swallowed by static. Still, part of my mind refused to take it seriously. I told myself it was drugs, or some weird group hysteria, or a string of unrelated violent episodes that happened to pile up on the same day. The human mind will do a lot of work to protect a sense of normal. Then the regional command channel came alive. All Forest Service staff remain at assigned stations. Maintain operations. Do not abandon posts. Repeat.
Rule
Do
3.
not abandon
Only
posts.
use radio in
Secure
short
housing.
intervals.
Limit outside contact with public. Await further instructions. The message repeated every few minutes in that same measured bureaucratic tone, like they were reading from a card. No matter what words they use, people in command always sound most interested in keeping systems running. The wording stuck with me, though. Do not abandon posts. Limit outside contact. It did not sound like something that would be over in an afternoon. I walked a slow circle around the tower cabin, listening to the wind tug at the glass. Down in the valley, the world was starting to tear itself apart on live radio. And up here, the only thing moving was a strand of duct tape peeling away from a window frame. I brewed fresh coffee, even though I did not need more caffeine, and stood by the west window with the mug between my hands. From there, I could see the faint line of the interstate in the far distance. Tiny shapes moved along it, cars and trucks crawling like insects across the snow. As the day wore on, the line of headlights became less steady. There were long gaps where no vehicles passed at all, then clusters where they bunched together. A few of them pulled onto the shoulder and stayed there, hazards flickering until the light faded. My phone buzzed again. Another alert. This one did not bother with calm wording. Shelter in place. Avoid hospitals and transit hubs. Civil disturbances reported in multiple cities. If you are in a safe location, remain there. No one had written that for people like me. There were no transit hubs within walking distance of my tower. No crowds. No hospitals. But the phrasing made my chest feel tight anyway. Safe location. The tower had always felt safe. Suddenly, I was not so sure. I tried calling my sister in Spokane. The call failed 3 times, then dumped me into dead air. No ring, no busy tone, just silence. I tried a friend down in Nash's. Same thing. For the first time that day, the quiet up here felt less like peace and more like being locked outside with no key. By late afternoon, the radio chatter had changed flavor. There were fewer local reports and more distant voices bleeding in from places I could not pin on a map. Some used codes I did not recognize. Some did not bother hiding their fear. One voice shouted over a bed of static that a crowd had broken through police lines near a mall, and that officers were backing away because the people did not respond to pain. Someone else yelled for any available unit near a hospital loading dock. Another voice simply said, "We cannot hold them," and then cut off while someone screamed in the background. Between those fragments, Regional Command kept pushing its calm little loop. All service staff, maintain your stations. Secure your facilities. Await further instructions. It felt like listening to 2 realities at once. One where procedures still mattered, and another where people were tearing each other apart in grocery aisles. Up in the tower, nothing moved. No emergency sirens, no gunshots, no crowds. Just a long pale band of sky and the slow darkening of the tree line as the sun dropped behind the ridge. The mountain does not care what happens down in the valley. It just keeps being a mountain. I stepped out onto the catwalk as the light faded, the boards creaking under my boots, and gripped the railing. The air was so cold it burned my lungs. Far below, in the valley, pinpricks of light began to appear at random points where towns and highway stops live their own separate lives. From this height they looked calm, peaceful even, like nothing was wrong. That was the lie distance tells. From far away, every disaster looks small. The wind picked up, rattling the steel and whistling through the frame. For half a second, the tower shuddered, and I thought of that single line in the old manual under my desk. Do not leave the tower after dark. Not for any reason. Back then, I always assumed the danger would come from the forest. A bear, a cougar, a drunk hunter with no idea where his bullet would end up. I never imagined the real problem would be the people far below me, turning on each other in parking lots and hospital corridors. The world below was losing its mind. Up on my steel perch, everything remained still. Too still. I went back inside, shut the hatch, and slid the extra bolt into place, even though I knew it would not stop anything determined. Old habits, small comforts. The radio hissed in the background, voices rising and fading like ghosts. That was how the outbreak arrived for me. Not with sirens or screaming at my doorstep, but with distant voices and digital warnings bleeding through circuits and wires. The forest stayed silent. The snow kept falling, and I sat alone in a metal box in the sky, listening to civilization come apart one broken transmission at a time. The night it happened did not start any different from a dozen others before it. The air was dry and sharp, the kind of cold that makes wood crack softly in the dark. A thin frost crept across the windows. Down in the valley, I could see a few scattered clusters of headlights on the highway, then even those faded as the last vehicles reached whatever destination they were desperate for. Inside the tower, the only sounds were the soft hum of the generator and the faint hiss of the radio. A regional loop repeated every so often, telling service staff to remain at stations and await further instruction. No new details. No plan. Just the same message spoken by a voice that sounded more tired each time it played. I made another round inside the cabin, checking the door latch, making sure the outer hatch was secure, adjusting blankets to keep drafts down. The kind of little rituals you cling to when the world outside your window is starting to feel less solid. The generator chugged along behind the wall, steady and familiar. As long as it ran, I had light, heat, and the illusion that I was still connected to something larger than myself. Sometime after midnight, I sat at the desk and tried to write a maintenance log entry that did not just say everything is wrong. Old habit again. Date, weather, visibility, equipment status. I logged the emergency alerts and the radio chatter in small cramped handwriting, just to prove to myself that this was all real and not some strange long dream. Then the tower went quiet. The generator did not sputter or cough. It did not struggle or fade out over a few minutes. One moment it was there, a low constant vibration under everything.
We're watching you.
And the next it was gone. The lights snapped off. The radio died mid-hiss. The little green indicators on the charge controller winked out. Silence hit me harder than any sound could have. Real silence. Not the gentle mountain quiet I had grown used to, but a heavy dead stillness where even the tower seemed to hold its breath. No power meant no heat, no lights, no radio, no link to the rest of the world that was rapidly tearing itself apart down below. For a few seconds I waited, thinking maybe the generator would catch again on its own. Sometimes it had hiccuped during storms. This was not that. Nothing returned. The dark stayed dark. I reached for the flashlight I kept clipped to the desk and turned it on.
What are you?
The beam cut through the room and painted the walls in dull gray. My breath came out in thin puffs that glowed in the cone of light. The temperature was already dropping. I moved to the back corner where the generator hatch was bolted to the floor and listened. No vibration. No smell of exhaust drifting up the shaft. Just the faint creak of the tower in the wind. I knew what the manual said. In a power failure, I was supposed to report status to command, begin troubleshooting, attempt restart, and if that failed, request assistance. That was the protocol. That was the comfort of a world where someone answered when you called. Now there was no one to report to, and no one to send help. Even if I went through every step line by line, I told myself I would look at it in the morning, when there was sunlight. No sense climbing down to the generator, shed in the dark with ice on every metal rung. I still had batteries, a propane heater, and enough layers to make it through the night. I was alone up here. At least, I thought I was. It was not long after the tower went dark that I heard the first new sound. At first, I mistook it for the wind shifting direction, a faint scraping below, like snow sliding off the side of the support structure. Then it came again, a little more deliberate, a little more rhythmic. Footsteps. Slow. Heavy. The crunch of boots or something like boots breaking a crust of snow, then sinking into the softer layer underneath. One step. Pause. Another step. I froze in the middle of the room, flashlight still in my hand, heart suddenly pounding so loud, it felt like it filled the whole cabin. It could be a hiker who had gotten lost, a hunter who misjudged daylight and ended up stuck on the mountain. It happened more often than people in town realized, but those people usually called out. They shouted hello, or swore to themselves, or made the kind of frustrated noise you make when you finally see a lit building after hours in the cold. This sound carried none of that. It was slow, measured, almost curious. I walked toward the ladder hatch in the floor on the east side of the cabin. The footsteps were clearer now. Snow. Wood. A dull thump against one of the support beams. Whatever it was, it had reached the base of the tower. The flashlight beam trembled slightly as I aimed it at the hatch. I stood there listening, every muscle wired tight. Part of my brain kept insisting that this was good news. A living person, up here of all places. Proof that life still existed beyond radio static and failed calls. A colder part of my mind remembered the reports from the valley. People attacking others in parking lots. Patients who did not respond to sedatives. Voices on the radio talking about crowds that kept coming even after being hurt. The sound moved to the ladder. The metal rungs ran straight down the center of the support shaft from the hatch under my feet to the ground, far below. I heard a hand grip the bottom one. Metal on bone or metal on glove, hard to tell. Then the faint scrape of weight being lifted, boot finding the first rung, foot pressing down. Step by step, it began to climb. I considered calling down. It was the natural thing to do. To say something like you picked a bad night for a hike friend, or hang on, I will get the hatch. To speak into the darkness and pretend the world was still normal. Against my better judgment, I did it. I raised my voice, trying to sound more calm than I felt, and asked who is there, followed by a short warning that this was a restricted structure and that they should be careful on the ladder. My words sounded small in the dark, swallowed almost instantly by the shaft below. For a moment the climbing stopped. The thing on the ladder went still. Then, slowly, it looked up. I could not see it clearly at first. My flashlight beam only reached so far down the shaft, and I had to angle it just right to catch anything at all. What I saw in that narrow cone of light was enough to carve itself into the back of my mind forever. A face tilted upward toward the hatch. Skin the color of old ice, gray and uneven, clinging too tightly to the skull in some places and bulging in others. The jaw hung at a wrong angle, not just broken but warped, as if it had been smashed and then forced into a new shape by hands that did not care about how bones are supposed to fit. Eyes stared up at me, or at the light, or at the sound of my voice. They did not look scared or relieved or angry. They looked empty, as if whatever person had lived behind them had stepped out and left the lights on by accident. Its fingers clutched the ladder rung in a way that was all wrong. The grip was too tight, knuckles stretched thin, nails dark with dried blood or dirt. When it shifted its weight, the movement was jerky and stiff but relentless. The thing made a sound then, somewhere between a breath and a groan, air passing through a throat that no longer knew how to form words. It tried to pull itself higher up the ladder, boots scraping, shoulders twisting at an unnatural angle. Every instinct I had screamed at that this was not a lost hiker, not an exhausted hunter, not someone I could help with hot coffee and a blanket. It was something else wearing what was left of a human body. I stepped back from the hatch without meaning to. The flashlight beam slipped off its face, and for a second, I saw only the pale blur of its hand reaching, groping for the next rung. Then I heard the sudden frantic scraping of its nails against the underside of the hatch door, as it realized there was a barrier between us. It clawed at the ladder, then at the metal frame, then at the underside of the hatch, fingers raking again and again. There was no hesitation in it, no sign of fatigue, just a steady, mindless insistence. The sound of those scrapes traveled through the floor into my leg. Each impact felt like a knock against the thin wall between the life I had known and whatever waited on the other side. I could have opened the hatch. Some part of me, the part still wired for normal human reaction, thought about it for a fraction of a second. If someone is hurt, you help them. If someone is trapped in the cold, you let them in.
Bring the documents.
That rule had been built into me over years of working in remote places. But there are moments in life where old rules die in a single breath. This was one of them. My radio was dead. My phone had no signal. There was no one to call for backup. No one to report this to.
Scanning horizon
The valley
again.
below was
No
already
movement
losing
visible.
its grip on order. No helicopter was coming. No rescue crew would hike up through the trees with blankets and clipboards. I was alone in a metal box anchored to a mountain, and something that used to be a person was trying to break its way inside. Survival is not a single idea or a heroic moment. It is a list, a structure, a cold calculation of what keeps you alive and what gets you killed. When I finally steadied my breathing and accepted that the world below the forest was no longer mine to depend on, I broke everything down into 4 categories, the same way search and rescue training drills used to teach us. Shelter, water, heat, movement. That was the order. The tower already counted as shelter, but only in the loosest sense. It had walls and elevation, but no real defense. Now that someone or something had climbed my ladder once, I knew it could happen again. The hatch would not hold forever. So the first job was reinforcing the entrance. I dragged the tool chest fully against the hatch and found 2 large wrenches that fit the deadbolt assembly almost perfectly. They became improvised braces wedged tight between the hatch frame and the weight of the chest. Then, I tied a length of climbing rope around the deadbolt handle and anchored the other end to the metal support beam on the far wall. Not pretty, not elegant, but effective enough to buy me time if anything tried forcing its way inside. Next came the windows. In the past they had been for watching the horizon. Now they were weak points. I could not risk the glow of a light or the shape of my shadow being seen from outside. The forest felt alive in a new way now, and I could not shake the idea that eyes were out there somewhere, moving through the dark. I dug through the emergency cabinet and pulled out thermal blankets, thick aluminum line sheets meant to reflect heat in survival situations. I stretched each one across a window panel and stapled them down along the edges until every surface was sealed in dull silver. The room looked darker, colder, and more like a bunker than a lookout post. Comfort had no place here anymore, only concealment and control. Heat was next. The propane heater that came standard with the tower was old and temperamental. When I fired it up, the flame flickered low, almost embarrassed. I knew I did not have enough fuel to run it constantly. So I gave myself a rule. 20 minutes on, 2 hours off. Enough to keep the room above freezing and my fingers from stiffening too much. Anything more would be waste. Waste had no meaning in my life before this, but now every burn of fuel felt like losing time I might need later. Even with the heater cycling in short bursts, I layered clothing until I felt like I was wearing half my closet. Wool socks, thermal pants, shirt, jacket, gloves. I wrapped a scarf around my neck and tucked the ends into my shirt so the fabric would not snag on anything. Cold was a quiet killer. It did not hunt you. It waited. Movement came last. In normal conditions, the catwalk, wrapped around the tower, was just a walkway, a place to lean on the railing and look across the forest. But after hearing something climb my ladder, I knew stepping outside carried new risks. My balance could falter from fear, cold, or exhaustion. One slip, one gust of wind, and the fall would end everything quickly. To counter that, I made a safety line. I took 50 feet of rope and tied one end to a support beam inside the tower. Then, I fed it through the window hatch and tied a series of secure knots along the railing of the catwalk. If I had to go out to check conditions, the rope would hold me even if my legs shook or the wind hit harder than expected. A tether between me and the tower. A reminder that survival meant reducing risks wherever possible. Once those 4 essentials had been addressed, I stood still and let the silence settle again. The tower did not feel like the same place anymore. Before, it had been a workplace. Now it felt like a shell, a shield, a thin line between myself and whatever the world had become. Everything had to be quiet. Every choice had to be intentional. I walked the perimeter of the cabin with the flashlight turned low, studying every seam, every hinge, every bolt. The more I looked, the more fragile the structure felt. The tower was built to withstand storms and years of heavy wind. It was never built to withstand something clawing at the entrance in the middle of the night. The temperature continued to drop. Frost crept up the metal supports near the hatch. The heater hummed softly during its cycle, then clicked off, leaving a heavy silence behind. I sat at the desk again and forced myself to breathe slowly through the cold air. My hands were trembling, and not just from the temperature. It was fear, but not the sharp kind. Not panic. This fear was steadier, older, like the body remembering something the mind had forgotten. I checked the radio again, even though I already knew what would happen. Static. Occasionally a distant voice, but never long enough to make sense of. Whatever was happening in the world outside my tower was still unfolding, and whatever systems once connected me to that world were breaking piece by piece. After a few minutes, I turned the dial down
Don't worry, I'm
and
right
let the
here.
static fade.
I just wanted
Better
to make sure
silence
you
than
heard me say
uncertainty.
how much I love you.
I made one final sweep of the room. Tools organized. Food inventory counted. Water supply set aside in manageable portions. Every item had a
We have
place.
contact at Checkpoint
Chaos
Delta.
outside
I
meant
repeat,
order inside
contact at Checkpoint
had to
Delta.
become
Send
strict,
immediate support.
almost ritual. There was comfort in that structure, in knowing every little detail served a purpose. Near the end of the inspection, I found myself pausing by the hatch again. I pressed my hand against it, feeling the cold metal and the faint vibration of the wind outside. The memory of that face looking up from the ladder flashed uninvited behind my eyes. For the first time since coming to work in this tower, I understood something that had only existed as a sentence in a forgotten manual. Darkness was a boundary, a line not meant to be crossed. The world below the mountain had already crossed it. I would not tonight, not ever again. The tower was no longer a job. It was a threshold, a place to hold, a place to fight for, a place to survive. Survival was no longer theory or preparation. It had become a clock. Food, fuel, and water were no longer comforts. They were time. Time before hunger. Time before cold. Time before weakness made decisions for me. I counted what I had in the tower and knew it would not last a week if I stayed passive. If I wanted more than a short, miserable existence, I needed supplies, and supplies meant going down. The idea alone made my stomach twist. I kept replaying the memory of that thing climbing the ladder. The way its warped jaw hung open, the dead stare, the clawing. But fear did not change the math. Staying in the tower without restocking would only delay the same ending. So I prepared. Before descending, I spent nearly an hour checking rope, harness, and knots. Under normal circumstances, rappelling down the east side of the tower would be reckless. Now it was strategy. The ladder had become a vulnerability. If anything waited below, the open vertical climb would trap me. Rappelling meant distance, speed, and some control over whether I touched ground silently or not at all. I secured the rope to one of the steel beams welded into the structure and leaned out over the railing. From up there, the snow below looked untouched, smooth as blank paper. No tracks, no movement, no signs of life, or rather, no signs of anything alive. My gloves were stiff with cold as I began lowering myself down. Each knot was tested twice, each shift of weight deliberate. My boots scraped the metal frame, and then the rope took full tension. The sound of the wind felt different outside the tower walls. Colder, sharper, like it was whispering something I was not meant to hear. Halfway down I paused and just listened. The world below the tower was so quiet it felt staged. The snow at the base glowed, faintly under the gray morning light. I wondered if the thing from last night was still there somewhere, hidden beneath the trees, waiting. But nothing moved. I reached the ground and crouched low, scanning the forest line. No footprints except mine. No drag marks. No disturbance in the snow near the ladder. It was as if the world had swallowed whatever had been there before the morning arrived. The ranger cabin sat a short walk away, small and square, with frost clinging to the window frame. It had always been a storage space for equipment and seasonal supplies. I had rarely needed it before. Now it felt like the last supermarket I would ever visit. I approached quietly, every step measured, weight distributed to avoid noise. The snow cracked under my boots like breaking bone, sharp and violent compared to the silence around me. I froze, listened. Nothing answered. The cabin door hung partially open, resting crooked against its hinge. That was wrong. It had been fully closed last time I was here. I pushed it open with the end of a trekking pole, not my hand. The hinges protested with a low groan. Cold air flowed out of the cabin and hit my face like a warning. Inside, the walls were splattered with dried blood. Long streaks, smeared handprints, chaotic trails across the wood. Not a single pattern, not an attempt to escape. It looked like something or someone had thrashed violently, wild and mindless. The radio on the desk was smashed into pieces. Not dropped or broken by accident, but destroyed by force. The casing was cracked open, wires torn, antenna ripped free. Something had tried to silence it. The door frame on the inside of the cabin had deep gouges cut into it. Not knife marks, not tool marks. They looked like claw strikes. Repeated, desperate, violent. My throat tightened, and my instinct was to step back, leave, return to the tower, lock myself inside, and pretend I had never seen any of this. But fear did not erase necessity. I forced myself forward, one slow step at a time. The shelves along the left wall still held supplies. Some items were scattered across the floor like someone had been searching through them in a panic. But there was food. Canned soup, beans, vegetables. Heavy, durable, life measured in calories. I loaded what I could into the backpack. Next I found the water purifier. A handheld unit with spare filters still sealed in plastic. I held it like treasure. Without clean water, winter survival becomes quick death. With it, snow became resource, not threat. Next shelf, flare rounds. Emergency signaling rounds in a metal tin. Not useful for contacting a world that may no longer be listening, but useful for light, for fire, or for scaring whatever was out there. Maybe even for defense. Beside them was duct tape. Strong, reliable, able to turn weak points into barriers. Feels simple until you need it. Then I saw the paracord. 2 full rolls. Gold. Absolute gold. My hands shook as I packed them. Rope meant options. Options meant survival. The cabin smelled faintly of copper and mold. The air was heavy, like something had happened there that the room had not forgiven yet. The longer I stayed, the more the silence felt wrong, as if it was waiting for me to notice something else. I scanned the room again. Sleeping bag. Tools. First aid kit. A small hatchet. I took all of it. Then my flashlight beam slid across the wall and caught something I had missed. A smear of blood running up the wall. Upward. Not from someone falling against it. From something climbing. My stomach turned. I did not want to know more. I did not want to understand what had happened. Some knowledge only makes fear grow teeth. I swung the backpack over my shoulder, tightened the straps, and backed toward the exit. Every step was slow, measured, silent. At the doorway I paused and listened again. A gust of wind rattled loose shutters. Nothing else. I stepped outside, pulled the door closed as quietly as I could, then took a deep, steady breath. The tower rose above the trees, sharp against the sky. For the first time since working there, it did not look like a workplace or an assignment. It looked like the last safe height in a world that had already started falling apart. The snow under my boots cracked again as I began the climb back up the rope line, one careful pull after another. I did not look back. Not once. The tower was waiting. And now, finally, I had something worth defending. By the start of the second week, the routine of survival had become a rhythm I did not have to think about. Heat cycles, food portions, perimeter checks, rope safety line, radio scan, sleep in short intervals, wake to silence. Repeat. The silence was what changed first. It was subtle at the beginning. The forest had always been quiet, but this was a different kind of quiet. The animals had stopped moving. No coyote calls in the early morning. No elk from the valley. Even the distant woodpeckers that usually tapped at the pines near dawn were gone. Nature had pulled back and begun watching the world with the same fearful patience I had. On the 9th day, movement finally broke that stillness. I almost missed it. I was doing a scan through binoculars out of habit, not expecting anything new. The glass swept over the valley, then the tree line, then the stretch of frozen road cutting across the landscape like a scar. Then something moved at the edge of my vision. 2 figures. Slow. Unsteady. Wrapped in layers of mismatched winter gear. Backpacks slung low, heads down. They were trudging through knee-deep snow, fighting every step as if gravity had doubled for them, and only stubbornness kept them moving. I adjusted focus and watched them carefully. They were not shambling or lurching. They were not dragging limbs or staggering blindly. They walked the way exhausted humans walk when they have been cold too long. Human. That word felt strange in my mind, like something fragile. I tracked them until they reached the clearing near the base of the tower. When they finally saw it, both stopped as if unsure whether to approach. One raised a hand weakly, as if waving or testing whether someone might be watching. I waited. Trust was no longer something given freely. Not in this world. The taller one turned slowly in a circle, scanning the surrounding forest as if expecting something to come out of the trees. The shorter one kept glancing toward the tower and then back at their companion. They looked half hopeful and half terrified. After several minutes, they began walking toward the ladder. I grabbed my binoculars again and looked closer. Their clothes were torn in places, but not stained with blood. Their movements were tired but coordinated. They carried gear properly, not clutched or dragging it like the thing from the night of the generator failure. Still, that did not make them safe. I waited until they were directly below the tower before calling out. My voice felt too loud in the cold air. Stop there. Both froze and looked up. The shorter one lifted her hand to shade her eyes. Are you alive? I asked. It was a strange question, but a necessary one. They looked at each other, confused, before nodding. Then I asked the second question. Any bites? Any injuries you cannot explain? The shorter one answered first. Her voice was hoarse and fragile from cold. No, nothing like that. We are fine. Please. We just need somewhere to get warm. The taller one spoke next, slower and more cautious. We saw lights here 2 nights in a row. We thought someone might still be alive. Hope was a dangerous thing now. I told them to hold still and wait. Then I clipped the rope safety line to my harness and stepped carefully onto the capsule. The cold pierced through my layers immediately, sharp and unforgiving. I lowered a small steel bucket tied to a rope. Inside was a flashlight and instructions. Shine the light directly into your eyes, then your hands, then your arms, neck, ribs. I need to see. They hesitated. I did not repeat myself. Finally, they took the flashlight and did exactly what I asked. Their skin was pale from cold but intact. No teeth marks, no puncture wounds, no discoloration. Their eyes reacted to light normally. Their breathing was steady. They did not twitch or jerk or stare blankly. After several long minutes, I lowered the rope ladder. Climbing up looked painful for them. Their muscles shook from exhaustion and cold. The wind hit harder near the top, and at one point, I thought the taller one might lose his grip, but he steadied himself and kept climbing. When they reached the hatch, I backed away and let them enter. I closed the hatch and secured every lock and rope behind them before speaking again. Names. The shorter one answered first. Maya Schultz, wildlife biologist. The taller one nodded. Riley Grant, trail tech, seasonal contract. Both names sounded real. both carried the tone of people who had worked in forests before. I handed them blankets and waited while they warmed their hands over the propane heater. Only after a full minute passed without either of them collapsing or seizing or changing in some horrible way did the fear in my chest settle into something manageable. Then came the rules. I spoke slowly. Rule 1. No loud talking after dark. They nodded. Rule 2. If someone knocks on the door or hatch, you never open it. They nodded again, but their expressions shifted. A flicker of confusion, a flicker of fear. Rule 3. If one of us gets sick, shows symptoms, or acts strange, we isolate immediately. This time there was no hesitation before they agreed. Silence filled the tower after that. The kind you get when 3 strangers realize they are the only living things in miles of frozen earth and pine forest. The heater hummed softly. The wind tapped against the window coverings. Somewhere far below the valley exhaled a long hollow sound that could have been weather or something wandering the woods. Eventually Maya spoke. We have been walking for days. We saw things on the road. People chasing cars. Something crawling out of a ditch. We think whatever is happening is spreading. Riley added more quietly. We heard radio calls at first. Then they stopped. I nodded. Same here. We all knew that meant something final. They ate small portions of food from the supplies I had retrieved.
I thought I
They
heard
drank
something over
melted
here.
snow purified through the hand pump. Their hands shook as they held the cups. Not from fear, but from the shock of being warm again. After they finished eating, they both wrapped themselves in blankets and sat close to the heater. Riley fell asleep first, sitting upright with his chin against his chest. Maya stayed awake longer, watching the hatch with the same alert tension I had the night I heard footsteps. For a while I watched them both, trying to read the weight they carried. It was strange, realizing how much the human brain wants company even when it fears it. Strangers became a team. Not because we trusted each other, not yet. Trust was too expensive, but because survival demanded structure, cooperation, and rules. We were no longer alone, in another life that might have been a comfort. In this one, it was only the next step in staying alive. The storm did not arrive gently or build over hours, the way mountain storms usually do. It struck the valley like something angry and sent from somewhere far beyond weather patterns and natural logic. One moment the forest outside was still and soundless, and the next the sky tore open with wind, so violent it felt alive. The first blast hit the tower hard enough that the floor beneath us trembled. A long metallic groan echoed through the support frame, low and strained, as if the structure itself was clenching its teeth. Snow slammed against the window coverings in rapid bursts. The aluminum thermal sheets rippled and flexed, vibrating under the impact. The heater flame flickered, stuttering as if afraid of the storm too. Riley moved toward the nearest wall like an instinct, then stopped when the tower shook again. Maya grabbed her backpack like it was some anchor to reality. No one spoke. There was nothing useful to say. Then the wind found its rhythm. It howled, not as a single solid noise, but in layered waves. Sometimes it rose sharp and high like a scream. Sometimes it dropped into a long rumble that felt more like a growl than a weather event. The tower trembled during every shift, as if the storm was testing it, pushing, waiting to see if it could break what we had built. The screws holding the frame together began to squeal under pressure. Each cry of metal against metal made my chest tighten. I found myself staring at the reinforced hatch, counting rope knots, and remembering the way the thing from earlier had clawed at the ladder. The wind made that same scraping pattern now, only bigger and more violent, like some massive hand dragging across the tower's skin. Snow struck the glass again, harder this time. The sound was sharp, almost like pebbles or bone hitting the panes. Maya flinched. Riley moved closer to the center of the room, away from the windows. Then came the knock, not a gentle tap or accidental impact from the wind. A heavy thud against the lower hatch. Once, then again. Something was outside. Something that was not the storm. The heater clicked off, and the silence inside the tower became suffocating. We were sitting in darkness except for the tiny ember glow of the last flame, dying in the heater chamber. The rope safety line near the hatch swayed slightly, not from us moving, but from the force of the wind pressing against the structure. My breath sounded loud in my ears, even though I was trying not to make a sound at all. I glanced at Maya and Riley. Both were frozen, eyes wide, posture rigid. Another impact hit the hatch. Louder, closer, less like weather, more like intention. Riley whispered too softly to be sure if he meant to speak, or if the fear pushed the sound out of him. Did something follow us? No one answered. The wind roared again, drowning the room in noise so thick it felt physical. Snow continued to hammer the windows in random bursts, each one sounding like a warning. The storm outside mixed with whatever was below, making it impossible to tell where nature ended and something else began. For several minutes, all we could do was sit and wait. The tower swayed, but it held. Every screw, every panel, every rope, every improvised fix and added brace mattered now. The survival decisions made earlier were no longer theory. They were the thin barrier dividing us from cold teeth and violent chaos. At some point, the banging stopped. Not slowly, not fading with distance. It just ended. As if whatever was down there lost interest, or was simply waiting. The storm did not stop, but the rhythm changed. The wind no longer screamed with wild randomness. Instead, it pulsed in long, steady breaths. The snow no longer struck the tower in scattered bursts. It landed in slow, heavy waves, almost like hands pressing against the covered windows. Riley finally leaned forward, elbows on his knees, hands covering his face. His breathing was shallow but controlled. Maya stared at the hatch with the expression of someone expecting it to explode inward at any second. Minutes passed like hours. Eventually the wind softened. The pressure eased. The tower still shook, but not violently. The metal stopped screaming. The storm began to retreat the same way it arrived, without warning, as if something had decided it was finished. Silence returned, but not the peaceful kind. This silence felt alert, listening, aware. Maya finally spoke. Her voice was low, barely more than air pushed through clenched teeth. If you had not reinforced the window joints, we would be dead. She was not exaggerating. Without the extra insulation and braces, the glass would have shattered. The blankets would have ripped free. Cold and snow would have filled the cabin in minutes. And whatever had been hitting the hatch would have had a way in. I did not answer her. Not because she was wrong, but because I was listening. Somewhere outside, beyond the wind and the fading storm, something was still breathing. Not close, not far, just there. Waiting, watching. The storm had not been a random weather event. It had been another reminder. The world was changing. And the mountain was no longer empty. Food did not disappear all at once. It dwindled the way daylight fades on a winter evening. Slow, unavoidable. Each meal became smaller. Each conversation about rationing grew shorter and sharper. Hunger has a way of stripping words down to instinct. Water was no longer something poured from a bottle. It was something chipped from the edge of the catwalk, melted over a weak flame, and consumed while still steaming to avoid losing heat. The propane canisters became our calendar. When one ran empty, a silent calculation replaced any spoken greeting. We knew how many were left. We knew how fast they would vanish. Time was shrinking around us. Tension began to take shape in the quiet. Riley paced more often. Maya spoke less. I checked the rope, knots, and windows, even when I knew everything was secure. The tower had become a fragile equilibrium. 3 people balancing hunger, cold, and the memory of the thing that once tried to claw its way inside. On the 13th day after they arrived, Riley finally said it out loud. "We will not last like this." No one disagreed. We spent the next hour listing locations within reach. The ranger cabin was empty now. The road below was too exposed. The lodge 3 miles west was too far and too uncertain. But there was one place that might still have what we needed. The fire station. It sat halfway down the mountain, above the valley but below the tree line, a small outpost used seasonally during high-risk fire months. If any place had fuel, emergency kits, portable comms, or thermal gear, it would be there. The risk was obvious. If something had reached the cabin, something could have reached the station. But starvation was a slower death, not a safer one. So we prepared. We dressed in layers, strapped packs tight, and carried only what mattered. Tools, rope, radios, a flare round, and a hatchet. The heater clicked off shortly before we left, the tower settling into another stretch of cold. Before opening the hatch, we listened. The forest was still. The storm had changed the landscape. Snowdrifts leaned against trees like tired animals. Branches bowed low, weighed down until they creaked under unseen strain. Then we began the descent. The ladder rungs were icy, each step a careful negotiation between gravity and fear. At the base, the snow swallowed our boots. No tracks, no disturbances. But the quiet did not feel empty. It felt watchful. We moved quickly. The trail to the fire station had once been clear. Now it was buried beneath white terrain broken only by the dark bones of tree trunks. Maya led. Riley followed. I watched the rear. Halfway there, we saw something strange. A line of prints crossing the trail. Not animal. Not booted. Bare. The steps staggered, toes pointed outward in unnatural angles. They continued into the forest until the darkness took them. Riley whispered, "Should we turn back?" Meyer answered without looking. No, we did not speak again. When we reached the fire station, the building stood half buried in snow. One door hung crooked, ripped partly from its hinges. The windows were boarded shut from the inside. A bad sign. People only barricade windows when there is something outside that wants in. I raised a hand and we stopped beneath the awning. We waited. No movement. No sound. Then Maya gently pushed the door. It swung inward with a soft drag across the frozen floor. The air inside felt stale, as if sealed too long. Flashlight beams jittered across walls lined with equipment hooks, and posters long faded from sun exposure. The tables were overturned. Papers scattered. Signs of panic, not looting. In the main hallway, we found what we had come for. Shelves stocked with emergency blankets. Fuel canisters. 2 working radios with battery packs still sealed. Sleeping bags rolled tight. A better water purifier unit. Medical supplies. Riley let out a shaking exhale, the closest thing to joy any of us had felt in weeks. We began filling our packs with practiced efficiency. No one needed to speak. Then Maya stopped moving. Her light froze on something ahead. The beam revealed bodies. Dozens. Standing. Not collapsed on the floor or slumped against walls. Standing upright in a silent line down the corridor. Ice clung to hair, lashes, skin. Their eyes were open, clouded with frost. Their mouths hung slightly open, as if mid-breath before freezing. Their clothing was torn in places, dirty in others. Some had dried blood around their necks.
Be careful with that
wrists,
crate,
or
it's heavy.
chests.
I know.
but none reacted to our
Where should we
light.
put the firewood?
None twitched.
Over there by the tent.
They were as still as statues.
बता दें
Riley
ऐसे
whispered,
पुण्य धरती हैं
"Are they dead?" No one answered. We stepped backward as quietly as
उनके
possible.
धनी से नहीं तो
Every instinct told us to move. Slow, careful, silent, and then something changed. A sound, a soft crack, like ice shifting. One of the frozen figures turned its head. Not fast, not violent. Slow, as if remembering the concept of motion. Then another, and another. Eyes that had seemed frozen rolled upward, searching. Searching
Here
for
is the
us.
code.
Riley
Thank
cursed
you.
under
Everything
his breath
checks
and
out.
nearly
Proceed
dropped
through.
his pack. I did not wait for the next moment. Run.
I told you
The
it would
word
work.
came out
They didn't
sharper
stand
than
a chance.
intended, but
And
it
you're
worked.
next if you keep
We
watching us.
bolted out the door,
Seriously,
snow
let's go get some
exploding
food.
beneath our boots. The cold air outside felt thin, brittle, and terrifyingly alive. Behind us, something collapsed or struck the doorway. A thump that echoed across the clearing. We did not look back. The climb up the mountain trail was longer than it had ever been before. Every sound felt amplified. Branches cracking, wind pushing through trees. My heart beating against my ribs. Riley slipped twice, catching himself with one hand each
We
time.
need to keep this tight to stop the
Maya
swelling.
kept moving, jaw clenched, breath ragged.
Applying the
By
final
the time
compression
we
now.
reached the tower ladder, exhaustion had become pain. But fear carried us the rest of the way. We climbed fast. At the top, I slammed the hatch shut and locked every improvised brace we had created. The tower shook with our weight and the lingering wind. For a long time, no one spoke. We sat on the floor, backs against walls, waiting for breath to steady and thoughts to catch up. Finally, Riley spoke. They were awake. Maya shook her head slowly. No, worse. They were waiting. The heater kicked on for its next scheduled cycle, filling the room with a faint hum, a small reminder that we had gained something from the risk. Fuel, radios, sleeping bags, supplies.
Stay with
But
me.
the
Stay
cost
awake.
was knowledge.
We're losing him. I
The
need O
world
negative now.
outside was not just dangerous,
Check the
it was
airway. Move
changing.
faster.
and now something down there knew we were still alive. We did not sleep that night. We sat in rotation, watching the hatch, watching the windows, listening for footsteps in the snow that never came. Morning did not feel like morning. It felt like borrowed time. We had supplies. But safety was no longer something we assumed. It was something we defended. We stepped backward as quietly as possible. Every instinct told us to move. Slow, careful, silent, and then something changed. A sound, a soft crack, like ice shifting. One of the frozen figures turned its head, not fast, not violently, slow, as if remembering the concept of motion. Then another, and another. Eyes that had seemed frozen rolled upward, searching for us. Riley cursed under his breath and nearly dropped his pack. I did not wait for the next moment. Run. The word came out sharper than intended, but it worked. We bolted out the door, snow exploding beneath our boots. The cold air outside felt thin, brittle, and terrifyingly alive. Behind us, something collapsed or struck the doorway, a thump that echoed across the clearing. We did not look back. The climb up the mountain trail was longer than it had ever been before. Every sound felt amplified, branches cracking, wind pushing through trees, my heart beating against my ribs. Riley slipped twice, catching himself with one hand each time. Maya kept moving, jaw clenched, breath ragged.
Everything is
By the
stable
time
now.
we reached
We'll
the tower
continue to
ladder,
monitor the situation
exhaustion had
closely.
become pain, but fear carried us the rest of the way. We climbed fast. At the top, I slammed the hatch shut and locked every improvised brace we had created. The tower shook with our weight and the lingering wind. For a long time, no one spoke. We sat on the floor, backs against walls, waiting for breath to steady and thoughts to catch up. Finally, Riley spoke. They were awake. Maya shook her head slowly. No, worse. They were waiting. The heater kicked on for its next scheduled cycle, filling the room with a faint hum, a small reminder that we had gained something from the risk. fuel, radios, sleeping bags, supplies. But the cost was knowledge. The world outside was not just dangerous. It was
We need
changing.
to address the underlying
And now
issues
something
before
down
moving
there
forward.
knew we were still alive. We did not
I'm just
sleep
not
that
sure
night.
this approach
We
is the
sat
right
in
one.
rotation, watching the hatch, watching the windows, listening for footsteps in the snow that never came. Morning did not feel like morning. It felt like borrowed time. We had supplies. But safety was no longer something we assumed. It was something we defended. Packing did not feel like preparation. It felt like leaving a life behind. Every item had to earn its place. Weight was the enemy. Sentiment had no value now. The tower had sheltered us, fed us, watched us, and warned us. But the mountain was no longer a sanctuary. It was a timer running out. We laid everything out in 3 piles across the floor. The heater hummed on its scheduled cycle, filling the room with a thin wave of warmth that barely softened the chill in our hands. The air smelled like cold metal, rope fibers, and the faint trace of propane. The sun outside barely touched the frost-coated windows. Dawn and dusk had started to feel the same nowadays. The first pile was clothing. Layers mattered more than fabric or appearance.
Just breathe. Stay
Wool
calm.
socks, thermal shirts,
prepared for
heavy
this.
coats,
Focus.
gloves.
Breathe.
Maya sorted what was necessary and what was luxury. There was no luxury left. The second pile was tools, rope, clamps, a knife, a map printed years ago, its corners soft from use, the water purifier, the flare round, the radios wrapped carefully in cloth to keep moisture out, a small hatchet that had already saved us twice without ever being swung. Tools were not just objects now, they were chances. The third pile was food. It was heartbreakingly small. A few cans, a bag of dried oats, a single granola bar, crushed slightly from being packed and unpacked too many times. Riley picked it up and turned it over in his hand as if memorizing the shape. He tucked it into his pocket like a personal promise. We moved without speaking much. Silence was easier than acknowledging what moving meant. The tower creaked softly and the wind shifted. The sound had become familiar, almost comforting. It was strange realizing soon we would never hear it again. When the packs were finally ready, we sat for a moment, staring at the window covering. For weeks the view beyond had been our world. The sky, the ridge, the shifting weather, the distant emptiness. Now it felt like an ending. There was one last task, a message. Not for us, for whoever might come after. If anyone ever climbed this tower again. If anyone survived long enough to search for shelter and found this place the way we once trusted a stable world to exist. I cut a piece of cardboard from a supply box and flattened it across the desk. My handwriting was rough and cold-stiffened, but legible. Words came slowly at first, then with more certainty. Boil snow. Stay silent at night. Reinforce windows. Never open the door for screams. I hesitated before writing the last line. If you're reading this, you're not alone. The pen halted for a breath. The meaning of the words felt heavier than anything in our packs. Hope had become dangerous, but silence was worse. People needed something to follow. Something to believe. We taped the message to the hatch using thick duct tape, layer after layer, until nothing could peel the edges. It looked like a warning, a rule set, a marker of those
Remember
who came
what I
before.
told you, Mija.
Riley added one more
brave.
small sentence in the corner, barely more
Remember
than a
what I
whisper
told
to the
you,
world.
Mija.
Keep moving. The heater shut off with a soft click. The silence that followed felt final. We stood. Checked our gear one last time. Tightened straps, adjusted gloves. Opened the hatch slowly and listened. No wind, no scratching, no breathing outside the door. Just cold. Before stepping through, I turned and looked at the room one last time. Not long ago, this tower was just a structure. Sheets of metal, wood, screws. a workplace meant for watching wildfire. But survival turns places into stories, and stories into memory. This was no longer a job site. It was the place where the world ended and began again. I looped the rope brace around the hatch handle and tightened it until the fibers strained. The metal creaked softly as I pulled it into position. Each knot was a farewell, deliberate and slow. When the last loop cinched tight, there was nothing left to adjust. I pressed my gloved hand to the hatch, feeling the cold metal through the fabric, and held it there for a moment. Not a goodbye, just acknowledgement. Then I stepped back and nodded to Maya and Riley. Time to go. We descended the ladder into a world we no longer recognized, leaving the tower behind us locked, silent, and waiting. Some structures protect you. Some change you. This one had done both. And now, it belonged to whoever came next. The hike down the mountain felt longer than the weeks we spent surviving in the tower. Snow swallowed our footsteps, and the cold beat through every layer we wore, but we kept moving. There was no turning back. Every mile put the tower farther away and the unknown closer. By the second night, exhaustion blurred thought. We walked in silence because talking wasted breath, and breath meant warmth. The forest around us was empty, or maybe just quiet enough to feel like it was waiting. Even the wind seemed to follow from a distance, rather than push against us. Then, on the morning of the third day, the fog shifted. At first, it looked like nothing more than a shadow under the pale sky. Then headlights cut through the mist, faint and low, like someone was trying not to disturb whatever slept in the snow. A military snowcat rolled toward us, tread slow, engine barely louder than a heartbeat. No markings, no flag, no promise, just survival. When it stopped, the side hatch opened, and a figure inside motioned to us. No introductions, no questions, no hesitation. We climbed in because that was the choice we made the moment we left the tower. Inside, the air was warm and dry. The heater hummed. Riley sat heavily on the bench, eyes half closed. Maya leaned back and finally let her shoulders drop. I stood for a moment longer, staring through the open door into the fog. Just before the hatch slammed shut, the tree line shifted, and I caught one last glimpse of the tower.
Are you coming?
Small, still, washing. A part of me wanted to turn back. A larger part knew that leaving was the only reason we were still breathing. As the snowcat rumbled forward, I whispered to myself, steady and quiet enough that only I could hear it. That is how I reinforced a forgotten fire lookout tower and survived the first winter of the outbreak. If you want more stories like this, hit like, subscribe, and tell me where you're listening